Okay. This meeting is recorded, so be aware of what you said. It will be public in the internet. So today, we can just discuss what we have done in the past few weeks, and if any interest topic you can raise anytime during the meeting. So in terms of me, so basically there are two major items going on in the last 2 weeks. One is the subrepo, the scheduler plugin subrepo. So I will set up the basic stuff like CI, like the prod job settings, like the I also use a sample plugin to connect all the dots to build a full life cycle scheduler. Of course, the customer scheduler, which can include all the out-of-tree plugins and also enjoying the benefits of the in-tree plugins. So you can check out the, I call it QoS QSOT plugin in the Kubernetes SIG/scheduler plugin repo. So right now CI is ready, and contribution is open for all the interesting parties who have their custom plugin developer in their companies, as well as you are welcome to contribute some ideas. If some guys are interested in your idea, they can get started with the design and the implementation. Okay, so, and also the release plan has been discussed. Right now, we still have to vendor the Kubernetes/Kubernetes, but in the future, maybe when Mike's plan to clean up the schedule dependencies down, we can remove the dependency on Kubernetes/Kubernetes. So yeah, that is for the scheduling plugin repo. Mike, do you want to talk about something about the proposal of cleaning up schedule dependencies?
Yeah, sure. So, so I made an issue for that. We've already got a couple people that have opened PRs making these changes, and they all, I've looked at a couple of them, but I need to actually give some more review on the others, but they all pretty much match up exactly what I was thinking. One thing that I clarified in the issue is that this isn't just cleaning up our dependencies necessarily. If we're like moving a constant from one package to ours, follow that and see what other usages in the code there is, so that we can see if if this can be cleaned up from other components as well, just to make sure that we're not duplicating code in any places or interfering with other components in the changes that we make. But yeah, and along with that, this is a lot of exploratory changes that we're going to do, or like there's still a lot that needs to be seen of what can we clean up. So some of these changes will be pretty simple, just move a constant from one package to another. Others might be more involved when you go to see where those are being used elsewhere in the code and how we're using them. So it seems to be going well. Got, I think, 4 PRs so far. Gonna get to reviewing the other 2 or 3 that I haven't yet. And a lot of people seem to be interested in helping out with this, which is good.
Yeah, sounds great.
I think we have a lot of dependencies on global utility packages, which are kind of tied to the core APIs. Do you have any specific plans for that?
Not at this time. No, I think I see that there are some core utility functions that we're depending on. That's one of those things that we're going to have to look at more deeply, how they're being used, what other places are using them. If we're the only people that's using like one of these core utility helpers, maybe then that helper can just be moved to one of our packages, but I haven't gotten that far into the reviews yet to see exactly some of these examples. So that's going to be a discussion that we need to have on a case-by-case basis, I think. So we just have to keep an eye out for those.
Yeah, from my experience, it's usually case by case. it's hard to address this kind of changes on a global base because it will depend on the scale of the changes that are required, whether we can share the code, whether it's possible to duplicate a code in some instances if it's a small helper, or whether we actually need to think about some kind of a shared library where we will be extracting that code.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we, sometime along the way, end up hitting spots that are a lot more complicated and involve maybe collaborating with some other teams to see what's being used here and how it can be cleaned up, if it can at all.
Okay, let's see how it goes. The next thing is about the preemption extension points. So I drafted a proposal in the Google Doc, and that received a lot of feedback. So basically, that feedback comes to 3 possible solutions we can go with. One is to use several extension points to describe each internal phase of the whole preemption workflow. That is the first one. The second one is to use one extension point. And inside that extension point, we define some internal private functions to describe the whole workflow of the preemption. And the third one is, like Bobby said, we cannot enforce the semantics of that point to be preemption. We can just say you can implement any logic as a post filter, which is just invoked after the filter. So basically, you can say, I don't want preemption, right? I just want to get notified when the filter failed. So I can take some other actions like invoke the cluster autoscaler to provision a new node, or just invoke the HPA, sorry, not HPA, VPA, vertical path autoscaler to reduce the paths requests or limits or sort of. So that option is the third one, which doesn't enforce the semantic of preemption. So the latter 2 options actually need some pre-factoring work to make that happen, because right now those kind of code are internally wired to some other internal data structures which we don't want to expose. So I did some evaluation on those 2 approaches, and I will send out a GitHub issue to discuss possible pre-factoring options, like how do we, for example, you know that the preemption has to call the filter functions, because internally it has to do a dry run to see whether its strategy can work based on some presumptions, right? So it has to call the pre-filters, and also some filter plugin relies on pre-filter, which is a pre-calculation on some kind of metadata and some cache to make the further calculation faster. So it has also to call the pre-filter plugin as well. And also some logic are depending on some scheduling queue. So a lot of internal stuff are wired together. So we have to separate those dependencies first. Otherwise, we cannot get to a conclusion which approach we are eventually go with. So that is one thing I'm going to send out a GitHub issue to brainstorm.
I think it's totally acceptable if we get to the conclusion where we believe that the preemption higher level logic, like we only have one, for example, we support one, and we just expose, as you proposed at the beginning, like 1 or 2 extension points to alter that logic. So if in your investigation you get to the point where there's so many dependencies in that logic that it's really hard to, factor it out all into one extension point without dependencies, that makes the whole thing, complicated. So I think that's fine.
Yeah.
You don't really need to tie preemption with autoscaler behavior and whatnot. We can just say, okay, this is the preemption logic that the default scheduler supports, and here are a couple of functions that you can implement to alter its behavior. I would have liked if we can make it more generic, but I think it's completely fine if we get to the conclusion where this is not feasible or makes our lives super complicated.
Yeah, that is thing I'm now evaluating. Some of the parts are very challenging if you want to make a very generic extension points. So yeah, let's discuss on the GitHub issue. I will send out later. And if that doesn't work, that options doesn't work, we can fall back to the first option, which to have 2 or 3 extension points describing the whole preemption logic. All right, and next, I think Abdullah has some reflecting work on moving the pod, so on refactoring the pod as a pod info and move that data structure to frameworks package.
Right. So what I'm trying to do is, one thing that I'm trying to do is to make sure that the framework package only doesn't have any external dependencies outside itself. Like, so basically plugins only can import a framework, the framework package, and the framework package itself only only depends on itself. It doesn't have any external dependencies. And I think that makes sense. They shouldn't be external, should reach out to anything outside. And anything that would require, for example, the framework to depend on anything outside, for example, the snapshot, it has to be behind the interface. So this framework defines an interface, and then at instantiation time, the logic that instantiates the framework will provide a specific implementation backed by that interface. And so there is no outward dependencies, the dependencies inwards. That was part of, again, the work around providing pod info. And so there, we had node info outside, we had the listers outside, and all of those concepts now can easily be moved inside. So this is what I did. And inside the framework, we will have the framework interface, we will have the types, the listers. And then, as Aldo suggested, we are going to split the implementation from the interface so that we make it even cleaner, where plugins can only refer to the interfaces, and any external components that wants to instantiate a specific framework implementation, like the cluster autoscaler, will have a dependency on what we call the runtime or the implementation. And this is probably going to help with Mike's effort into trying to decouple things and untangle all these dependencies and potentially move maybe in the future the frameworks interface into staging, and so it becomes something that external plugins can reference without importing the whole KK as well. So I'm halfway there. I have another couple of PRs I'm going to submit to change, basically clean up first node info. There's a lot of logic there that I think is obsolete and needs to be cleaned up. And node info itself now is the type that's being returned when you access the pods on a node through node info. So in a follow-up PRs, we're going to include more information in that pod info that we can pre-calculate once, basically selectors and whatnot, that filters and other plugins can rely on without computing it again and again and again. So it will probably give us a performance boost.
All right, thank you. And anything else? Anyone else wants to talk about some open issue or something before?
So quick update from my part. So I'm mostly focusing on getting component config into a beta state, and that pretty much reduces to fixing our API because we have missed the types for plugging arguments, and some of them don't even have JSON tags. Actually, just a couple of them, fortunately. But we need to get that to state, that API to a state where we can promote it. So I'm working on getting a proper decoding and the types just landed. We now have the types in staging, but the coding is still on its way.
But again, like as I commented on the issue, the adding the plugin args shouldn't be a blocker to beta. Like it's something we can add. It's not something that will require us to change, drop fields or change the existing interface, right? Like even if it was GA, we could have done this work as well.
Yes, but at least having this cleaner and removing all the API violations will allow us to have a clean interface later. Clean API.
No, I'm not disagreeing with doing the work. I'm just saying that though, like it shouldn't be looked at as a blocker to beta. I see them as two parallel efforts. Just
yeah.
my thought. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. It's just that we have had these issues here, and we've also had issues in the extender API where we are not complying, which makes our life harder with API reviewers. That's something we need to fix. Yep, just that.
Yeah, I think that one that to make the arguments as typed data structure has been merged, right, to the staging.
Yes, that's merged, and I'm working on the coding next.
Okay, nice. So another PR can rebase that and will be merged soon, I guess.
Yes, and there were a couple of feature requests that now we can work on. I'm gonna ping the contributors to work on them now. I think one of them was about ignore resource groups or something like that.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing is that Aldo also submit some 2 PRs to improve the performance of part topology spread. The first one is to treat the case that the pod which wants to spread the path onto the host as a special case, because in that case, if it has a lot of nodes, the internal data structure wasn't optimal, so that there was some optimization on that. The second one is to somehow internally use the atomic package against a point instead of using explicit log onto integers. So that's those 2 PRs improvement the part topology spread, and that is also can qualify the feature to be GA in Y19.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, one thing to note there is that we got to a point where scoring is faster than filtering when using even pot spread, and it's because of the way how we calculate the score, in which we don't depend on our nodes, whereas filter, we depend on other nodes, so we need the pre-processing earlier. So we need to keep this data structure, the map, which is slower. So yeah, I guess we could recommend that if you just want performance and you don't mind a skew that might be violated, then you should use scoring instead of filtering.
But again, this is this also tied with the node as a topology or not?
Yes. So the fix or the improvement that we did for scoring doesn't apply to filtering.
No, what I meant is the improvement. Is it exclusive to constraints that use node topology?
Yes.
The first one,
Okay.
the first PR is to, yeah.
The scoring one, that's what I.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
you mentioned that the scoring is now faster, but it's only in the context of node topologies.
Yes. Yes,
Right.
that's true. And
Yeah.
for filtering, we changed the data structure to use atomic. But if yeah, we could either recommend users to avoid using node when using filter, or to just use scoring.
I'm surprised. Like, I mean, we should still be faster when doing like node level topology with filter. I mean,
no, because we have to calculate the skew. So for that, we need to know all the size of all the nodes.
okay.
The number of pods in all the nodes.
Yeah, that's because so in terms of score, we kind of just calculated the relative importance of the each node. So we don't actually take the max skew into consideration. So that is a relative value. So, but in terms of filter, that's an absolute metric we must honor. So basically, yeah, I think that's the case.
I imagine that the logic should be very similar to node anti-affinity there.
No, definitely not exactly. So no,
I mean, for the scoring, like it's the relative value is basically
yeah, scoring is almost the same. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, this is what I'm saying. Like the scoring should be pretty much the same.
Yeah.
It should give you a similar result, yes. But it's just something that we can point out in the documentation, that if you want fast, you should be using scores.
Okay, I think that is basic, the major steps we are going with. And Alex, I see you are online. Do you want to talk about something about your proposal of the code scheduling, as well as your idea of doing the lazy evaluation on the resource quarter thing? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I want to talk about the lazy evaluation about resource quota. I add something in the doc of the idle, and I want to add some quota to describe the namespace and I want to set the quota, the limit and request of the user, and to evaluate it in the scheduler. And I think if we add this one in the scheduler, we will to improve the cluster resource usage. Yeah, I don't know if I describe it clearly.
So I can describe something because Alex talked to me offline. So basically, there was a requirement, I think is long discussed in the community, which is that they want a soft resource quarter, which doesn't take into effect during the admission time, which is upon the API object creation, for example, pod creation. So they want the resource quota to be evaluated later during the scheduling time so that they can, for example, two teams share the quota. Maybe one team use a lot and the other use less, or the vice versa. So that is one, I think, which is maybe a common requirements during the batch workloads. They want to submit a series of workloads, but the workloads doesn't need to be executed at the same time. They just want to put the pods into the queue, and internally scheduling can adjust the quota assigned to each, for example, each namespace or each software tenant balancely, or one tenant can borrow some resource quota from another, sort of like this kind of thing. So I should have an issue. I remember someone opened 1 year or 2 years ago, but I think Alex and his company has some internal practice on that. So it will be good. It can be abstracted into a cap and go with this implementation. So yeah, for some heads up. All right, I think this is pretty much for today's meeting. Anyone else has some issue to discuss?
Please tag me in that issue.
Oh, sure.
It's there already.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me paste it onto the Google Doc. All right. Thanks for your time, and this is for today's meeting. And we will see you next week, maybe next week.